warfare. But that was, of course, exactly what would create surprise. In fact, the Germans had already mounted successful attacks through the Ardennes in 1914 and 1940. Moreover, intelligence had by now established that the Allies refused to believe that lightning could strike in the same place 3 times. In the autumn of 1944, the Ardennes formed an American sector where inexperienced Green divisions trained and battered forces caught their breath. The German build-up for the offensive began as soon as Hitler had made his decision. As early as the end of September, combat units were being siphoned off from the Western and Eastern fronts for the daring strike through the Ardennes. That all this could happen without the Allies realizing German intentions constitutes one of the great intelligence failures of World War II. In part, the explanation lies in strict German security measures. These included, among many others, the avoidance of radio traffic, a decision that made it impossible for the Allies to rely on the hugely successful ultra-decryptions of high-level military commands. Ultimately, however, the intelligence that was available was misread, for the simple reason that the Allies refused to believe that the Germans, by the end of 1944, were still capable of any offensive effort on the scale that they were soon to demonstrate. Surprise was total on the morning of December 16th. Some 200,000 German troops smashed into the thin American lines with the support of 500 tanks and 1,900 artillery pieces and rocket launchers. On the first day of the offensive, the Germans enjoyed a 3-to-1 advantage in manpower, a 2-to-1 advantage in tanks, and general superiority in artillery. Even then it took some time for the Allied commanders to gauge the massive scale and ambition of the German offensive. By the 3rd day, the width of the salient stood at 47 miles. On the 10th day, the Germans reached their deepest penetration, some 60 miles, before having their armoured spearheads blunted within sight of the Meuse. After losing the initiative, the Germans continued to fight ferociously, drawing in ever more of the opponent's forces as the Blitzkrieg now became a war of attrition. All in all, Hitler committed some 410,000 men to the offensive, as well as 1,400 tanks and assault guns, 2,600 artillery pieces and rocket launchers, and just over 1,000 combat aircraft. By the time the enemy was pushed out of the Bulge, General Dwight D. Eisenhower, the Supreme Allied Commander, had thrown almost 600,000 troops into the massive gap. The odds were against it, one historian has remarked, and the odds prevailed. Despite initial panic and Churchill calling on Stalin at the start of January to speed up the Soviet offensive to help relieve the pressure in the Bulge, Patton early on read the German effort for what it was, the dying carp's last flip of the tail. In the midst of daunting 2-front warfare and punishing air offensives, the German military build-up was remarkable, but Hitler had to scrape the bottom of the barrel to make it possible. There was, by contrast, no end to the number of barrels and crates and boxes that continued to arrive from the United States in response to the crisis. Unhampered by constant air war, displaying the efficiency that had made the country the economic envy of the world before the Great Depression, factories in the United States churned out the ammunition, trucks, tanks, and aircraft that the Germans could now no longer replace. America's industrial superiority was decisive in a battle that destroyed an estimated 800 tanks on either side. A week after the start of the offensive, the Americans had brought into position no fewer than 4,155 pieces of artillery. By January 3rd, they had fired a stupefying 1,255,000 artillery rounds. Equally important, American oil wells were providing crude in vast amounts at a time when the Germans had lost access to crucial oil reserves with the fall of Romania to the Soviets. By the same token, the Americans were finding it easier to mobilize replacements for casualties. By the start of 1945, German commanders had to make do with false promises. By mid-January 1945, Patton had received enough new soldiers to replace all the losses suffered in his Third Army, plus 6,000 more. These were critical advantages in the Battle of the Bulge, which ground down troops at horrendous rates, roughly 81,000 casualties, dead, wounded, captured, and missing in American ranks, and an estimated 81,000 to 104,000 troops lost by Germans. In the epic battle that unfolded in the Ardennes, it was by no means clear from the start that Bastogne was to play such a pivotal role. In one way, of course, the very fact that the biggest battle